Good morning, good morning, good morning. Let me knock out this video. I am so sorry. Shout out um, to the couple of you who reached out yesterday, ready for my lecture and didn't have it on the video. My bad. Um, just some family stuff going on, y'all, but I'm sure y'all understand that. Go ahead and knock this out. I wanted to do about 30 minutes or so um, on Black nationalism. I know we mentioned it in class the other day in terms of its relationship or one of its origins with Marcus Mosaic Garvey. And so this morning I just want to explore one of the most powerful and enduring legacies or traditions of African American or Black political thought, right? And that, is the Black nationalist movement, right? Um, I think when we hear of nationalism, especially like in 2025, we're thinking of, Confederate flags or, white nationalism, but black nationalists exist as well. And one of the things, just for broader political purposes, when you hear a term like that in politics, it pretty much means a protectionist stance, a sort of tribalism of a certain sense, right? Meaning, this is our nation, right? But it's never broad like USA, USA, right? It's more of a sort of a racial or ethnic category, right? And so, we might think of, flags and all that kind of stuff, but when we think of black nationalism, though, you got the red, the black, and green, right? The African American flag or the nationalist flag. Red is for the blood, black is for the people, green is for the land, right? Um, but black nationalism means self determination, right? The idea that black people must define, so they must define, they must defend, and they must develop. So think of it as three D's, right? Define, defend, develop. Remember that. Define, defend, develop themselves socially, economically, and politically, rather than sort of depend on systems that historically exclude them. Um, so we think about Marcus Garvey's in the 1920s through Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, Louis Farrakhan. The sort of the heartbeat of this movement has remained pretty consistent. Namely, that if we can't find justice within the system, we build justice for ourselves. And so let's try to trace this journey a little bit. If you have your notes, go ahead and get it out. Let's go ahead and knock this video and these notes out. Of course, it'll be on your test as well. But so we begin with Marcus Garvey, right? We talked about him already, right? Born in Jamaica, what, 1886, 87. He was the founder of the UNIA, right? The Universal Improvement Association, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, whose, you know, motto was Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, right? That was his thing. As we talked about the other day and in my previous lecture, Garvey emphasized economic independence, black owned businesses, being proud in America, and global unity, this sort of idea of pan Africanism, right? Pan meaning across, right? Across Africa, right? So that would be pan Africanism or global unity among people of African descent. We talked about the Black Star Line, his shipping company, and the Negro World magazine, which was meant to sort of connect the African diaspora, both spiritually, socially, and economically, right? Most of his movement kind of died down after he was imprisoned in 19. Don't quote me, look it up, but I think it's 1923. And Garvey clearly was the sort of driving intellectual and moral and, social political force behind that inspired generations from Elijah Muhammad to Malcolm X to, Huey Newton and, and others, right? Yeah. Uh, so you should be able to, by this time, right? That's background. You should be able to answer the question of anybody, like, what are the goals? What are the central goals of the UNI and Marcus Garvey, right? And then you would, be able to say racial pride, economic independence, and sort of a Pan Africanism, worldwide Black unity, right? Um, if you ever want to do some more research on that or watch some videos or something, there's a PBS thing on Marcus Garvey's. I think it's called "Look for Me in the Whirlwind" or something like that. There's a book of the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, so that might be kind of cool to watch. So let's talk about the Nation of Islam. I know I made reference to it as being influenced by Garveyism. Um, During the Great Depression, uh, um, the a newer form of Black nationalism arose in America under the guise, or under the form of the Nation of Islam. Right. Um, the Nation of Islam was founded by a man named Wallace D. Farard Muhammad. Right. Wallace D. Farard is spelled Fard, and then Muhammad. Right. In Detroit, Michigan. Right. He was inspired by God um, to found this religion slash political ideology for Black folk in America. Uh, it was later led, or really brought into its size, its stature by Elijah Muhammad, um, and the Nation of Islam teaches people that um, there is moral decay among our European ancestry, and that you know it also teaches that's the idea Black nationalists thought of doing for yourself. So many of the Nation of Islam built restaurants, schools, farms. Right, we all know the bean pies, but that's stereotypical. But it is about the self-sufficiency of the magazine Muhammad Speaks, or the newspaper, excuse me, Muhammad Speaks. And the movement sort of recognized or emphasized a sort of spiritual renewal, discipline, economic independence. Through the Nation of Islam, it's, through Malcolm X, we come to, I mean, through Elijah Muhammad, we come to know um, Malcolm Little, Malcolm X, who we know as of his fiery oratory and turned the Nation of Islam into a national force, right? So, in general, I know this is online. We could spend a whole semester talking about Black nationalism, but you should be able to at least articulate how did the Nation of Islam's sort of message of self-discipline and separation, right? Again, in the spirit of Marcus Garvey, we're not accommodationalists, right? Like Booker T. We're Black separatists, right? And so, how does that separation differ from the civil rights emphasis of integration. So the next video you'll watch is on civil rights movement. A lot of the civil rights argument is about integration, right? So how does so think about it as a question to answer. How does the Nation of Islam's separatist philosophy or self-determination, self-discipline, right? How does that differ um, from integration, right? And you'll be able to articulate that, the Nation of Islam specifically, preach the separation, self-reliance, as opposed to inclusion and legal sort of equality, right? Obviously, you have the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, a foundational text that has been read probably a million times. The movie Malcolm X, Spike Lee, if you ain't seen it, it's powerful. It should have won best film that year, but I think that's the year that Forrest Gump won, I believe. But it was in '92, right? But you should watch that if you haven't, maybe over the winter break or something. Watch Malcolm X by Spike Lee. I'll give you just a little bit about the civil rights movement. Obviously, the video that you're going to watch next is going to talk a lot more about it. But the civil rights movement is sort of burgeoning around the same time. Obviously your popular names, Martin King Jr., Rosa Parks, Fred Shuttlesworth, Ralph Abernathy, those type of names. It pursued integration and legal equality. Oh, please don't forget that Fannie Lou Hamer, um, through nonviolent protest, right? So the civil rights movement was all about nonviolent protesting. It was all about the pursuit of integration and legal equality. Um, you know, and then you have really a groundswell of that happening in the South, right? But obviously, you would have it in the North, especially with black churches and things like that. Um, Black communities who were feeling, relatively isolated. Not isolated, the wrong word. Relatively small numbers, but certainly in active numbers of working class black folk beginning to build a sort of an integrationist thought. And we now, right, are part of America, right? But black nationalists in the North, Detroit, Chicago, Philly, New York was really trying to push that. I don't know if this America thing is for us, y'all. We got to do this ourselves, right? Kind of thing, right? The civil rights movement itself was kind of um, really about like Christian love. It had a lot to do with what the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, right? SCLC, which Martha King was the head of, right? Uh, like a lot of people really talk about King and X, right? Although they were sort of presented as opposites, King versus X, right? Booker T versus Du Bois, right? Du Bois versus Marcus Garvey, kind of stuff. Um, you know, they were more like contemporary prophets, like literally living at the same time, fighting for the same folk, and just powerful folk. Like I would love to have lived at a time where we had both Malcolm X and Martin King, right? For real. Uh, but King obviously was worried about Malcolm and was worried that Malcolm's mm, rhetoric, all right, might and would incite backlash. But the reality is, they were getting backlash from white, supremacists and anti-civil rights folk all over the country, irrespective of Malcolm X. So it's hard to kind of blame Malcolm X for the white rage against black folk, especially in the South, because X's presence wasn't as prevalent in the South as King's was, and vice versa. I mean, even though King had some influence in the North, um, you know, it was more folk around with the Nation of Islam than it was that was following with the SCLC, right? So, um, but they both respected each other, right? That they did meet. History says that they did meet in 1964 in D.C. at a Senate hearing. But you know, uh, if we did a long time on Malcolm X, if you watched the movie or if you read the book, you'll hear that how Malcolm begins to shift and King begins to shift, right? Malcolm begins to shift away from sort of this idea of um, a separatist black world and begin to himself be more Pan-Africanist, linked to Africa and Asia and the Middle East especially. He does his pilgrimage to Mecca, um, becomes more broad, establishes, of course, he gets thrown out to Nation of Islam, but he establishes his own organization um, of Muslims that focuses more around a sort of an organization of African unity, right? And King, got involved more in the Poor People's Campaign, really speaking about maybe this thing ain't gonna work in America. We're gonna keep trying it, but he is famous to have said that he was concerned that maybe this nonviolent stuff, which he believed in, no question, but he was famous to have told Harry Belafonte, right, the great actor in Jamaica, I think, or Bahamas. I forgot where he was born. Um, but it's somewhere in the Caribbean. That he's afraid. King said he was afraid that he's leading black folk into a burning house. So you might want to look that up. Martin Luther King burning house reference, or something like that. You can Google it. But King began to think whether or not he's effective in this concept or this idea of nonviolent civil rights, right? So, okay. So, in short, if we think of another kind of question you should be able to answer at this point, again, broadly, not a whole semester, little video, things you probably already heard, but something like in what ways were King and Malcolm X, sort of engaged, the philosophies of King and Malcolm X, in what ways did they come together, in what ways were they different, right? But they both seriously they came together because they both saw freedom tied to sort of the human rights behind beyond race as well as economic power, right? Eyes on the Prize, is really a good thing to watch on PBS. It's probably on YouTube as well. But Eyes on the Prize, y'all probably seen some of that in high school, right? But I know episodes 5 to 8, and one of the episodes we're going to show in the well, we didn't show Eyes on the Prize, but we have another video through civil rights, right? Um, but and then there's um, the one that you're going to watch on Ali, um, Rosa Parks and Malcolm X. So after one more thing about Malcolm X and global liberation. Um, Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam in 1964, founded the OAU, which is about the Organization of African American or Afro American Unity. Um, then, his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, where he makes the quote that I met people of all colors who treated me as a brother. The problem of the world is not color, it's injustice, right? So remember, the Nation of Islam is all about black versus white. White people are the enemy. Elijah Muhammad was famous to said, blonde haired, blue eyed devil. X repeated that a few times. White men are the devil kind of stuff, right? That kind of language, fiery language, um, we learned from early Nation Islam with Malcolm X. And said Farrakhan doesn't really use language like that, but he has. But in the last probably 20, 25 years, he's maybe even 30 years, he hasn't used language specifically like that. Maybe more than that. Farrakhan is so old, but he doesn't look it or act it. It's just amazing how God is preserving his mind and his body. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But X began to link black struggle in America to a sort of a more global or sort of post-colonial, anti-colonial movement. He made a shift, right, between uh, racial separatism and global solidarity, right? And so he ultimately he may have started as a black nationalist, but he ended up being a more of a pan-Africanist or really a human rights revolutionary, right? We know that we know that X was assassinated in 1965, and we know that King was assassinated in 1968. Right? Um, Black Panther Party. Let's talk about that for a minute, right? BPP, right? Founded in Oakland, California, Oaktown. The Bay Area. You know, Black Panther Party was founded in 1966 by two folk, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale. Right? Remember them folk, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And they founded the Black Panther Party. The entire title or name of the organization is the Black Panther Party for Self Defense. They had a 10-point program, right? I'll run down the 10 points, make sure I got them here. Run down the 10 points. It's most of it, but it was all about, I don't have it up right now, but I know you had issues like, free community breakfast, free health clinics, education, legal aid, things that the BPP was given to their own communities. Again, tied into a black nationalist position, self sufficiency, self preservation, self determination, that kind of stuff, right? Um, and so, their famous quote was "Power to the people, brother," sister, that kind of stuff. So the Black Panther Party, all power to the people. I'm gonna mention this. I'm gonna give you maybe I'll write up first. You all like me to do these little study guide things. So I'll do a little a definition thing. But remember, or so some of you might have heard the term COINTELPRO, the FBI COINTELPRO. It was an FBI initiative against the Black Panther Party and ultimately against black folk, especially urban black folk, but it was directed against the Black Panther Party and their model, of what they were doing in urban communities. But they still had kind of an impact, right? A lot of death, right? They got into a firefight where Fred Hampton was killed with police. There's a lot of good movies on Black Panther Party out there, both motion pictures as well as one of the good one was um, the Vanguard of Revolution, right? And the Black Panthers, the Vanguard of Revolution, and there was a major motion picture, the Black Panthers, right? Panther, right? Um, uh, a book that I've taught in my Black philosophy class is Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide, and Asada Shakur, God rest her soul, she just died recently, her autobiography, right? Um, I think a little bit about Louis Farrakhan before I kind of get ready to close this thing. Louis Farrakhan, right? After the Black Panthers kind of had disintegrated a lot because of the FBI's infiltration in the organization, massive arrests, the big, a couple of different gunfights with the police and folk. The Black Panthers was all about the guns, right? The self defense, right? And Louis Farrakhan kind of began to revive the Nation of Islam a little bit more after Malcolm X's death around like late 1970s. Um, One of the most important things Louis Farrakhan has done in American history is in 1995 he organized the Million Man March in D.C., um, where nearly a million black men pledged unity and accountability. Um, in D.C., it was powerful. I was there. Um, and so the Million Man March was in 1995. Despite controversy, Farrakhan, kind of continued, right? Garvey, Malcolm X, tradition of moral renewal, a sense of black men and black women being morally responsible, being clean, being healthy, being good for their communities, their spouses, the idea of discipline, right? There's a documentary called Nation Times, an old one, but it's really a good one that I learned a lot about the Black Political Convention, which is one of the precursors to the Millionaire March, right? So that's enough for right now. I think again, just to get you thinking about Black nationalism in a more sort of survey broad sense. Um, from Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line, it ships to King's marches to Malcolm X's speeches, to Black Panther Party and its initiatives and clinics. One of the common threads throughout is the quest for autonomy, self governance, self naming, and dignity. Black nationalism um, wasn't just resistance, right? It was about reconstruction, it was about building power where no power was given. Um, Martin Luther King dreamed of an America that would live up to its promise, right? But Malcolm and others demanded that it do so immediately, right? We think of King, you think of X, they both died young, right? But their voices still shape every conversation about race and justice, self determination, right? Things like, what does it mean to be free when your community doesn't control its schools, its institutions, its economy, or even its image? When we even talk about equality without self determination? And I think that's the question of sort of black nationalism. And it's maybe even ours as a class to think about, you know, even in 2025, you know, if one, and this class may be a representation that there is some type of at least inclusion and racial, I wouldn't say harmony, but certainly most of you in the classroom get along. Most of you on this campus get along, even though a lot of us are politically different. A lot of us obviously come from different social economic perspectives. We get along, so maybe that's an example of the legacy that these folk have led. That hey, we've you know we've come a little bit, right? We've come we've come a little bit, right? But the reality is, we still got, some places to go, right? Um, but also I think that, we should at least raise the question of, did they have a point? Did black nationalists have a point, right? Um, i- if we think about it in the sense of Garvey sort of brought it to the American consciousness. There was some tension, some relationship with the black with the civil rights era, and then it transformed, right? Obviously, um, you know, but did it did black nationalism have a point? Right? That'd be interesting to think about. I'm trying to find um, something, right? I remember I was trying to find those 10 points. But y'all can look that up. But I'll have it in the study guide. But certainly, when we think about the 10 points of the Black Panther Party, remember we talked about the food, right? Decent housing, full employment, right? Um, Police brutality, right? To end it, right? That was a part of their points, right? A real, true, honest education, and the freedom to control our own destinies, right? Um, so, but COINTELPRO is going to be something I remember because it was a systemized attempt, right, to fragment black people and black power, right? Um, it was really something, right? It was really something to think about, right? Um, so I don't know. I think that's about it. I think hmm, checking my little notes here. Did I go over what I wanted to go over? Um, right. So we think about yeah, I think so. So I think so. We think again if we kind of follow back what I said in the lecture about questions you can answer for this assignment. You want to think about what brings Garvey, Malcolm X, Huey Newton, and Bobby Seale, Black Panthers, and Farrakhan. What brings them together across generations? What's the common thread? Right? What are the principles? Basically, what are the principles um, that bring all those different folk through all this different period of time of 60 years? What brings them together, right? Garvey, X, Newton, and Farrakhan, right? Four people. Question number one. What brings all four of them together? Question two. How did self help, self determination evolve into self defense, right? Think about that, right? And then social revolution, right? Which ultimately is what, people were fighting for in terms of civil rights, right? So, how did the idea of self help, right, yield a sense of self defense, BPP, and then a revolution in terms of social revolutions, protests, stuff like that, right? Think about the conception. How does that thread happens? And then, do we see? So that's question number two. Question number three. Um, do we see remnants of black nationalism today? Activism, culture, politics, right? Do you see any black nationalism, right? Is it in your Twitter? I don't really follow social media that a lot of young people do. I'm an old head, so I'm Facebook, right? But do you see any black nationalist ideas or going on? Do you hear any people who represent that maybe, you're either not scared of literally, but scared of their politics in terms of what it means for America, or you may get down with like this is really what it was. We talk about black nationalism, now we're not talking about necessarily um, you know, Charlie Kirk or anything, right? God rest his soul, I guess. But yep. So all right. So answer those three questions, right? One more time. I know y'all be like, I'm confused. I didn't. Y'all be killing me. Y'all always confused about something. Y'all ain't thinking it right. Well, not you, but the students always. That's their first thing. I'm confused. No, you're not. You just ain't thought about it, right? Anyway, um, quick question number one. What unites Garvey, Malcolm X, UAP Newton, and the Black Panthers, and Farrakhan? What unites them? What threads them throughout the generations? Right. Number two, how does self help evolve or move into self defense, and that evolve and move into social revolutions and social protests? And then three, where do we see black nationalism today? Where is it existing? Do you see it? Maybe you don't. But do you see black nationalism in your social media, in the way you look at politics, activism, or culture? All right, y'all. I think that's about what 35 minutes. So um, enjoy. Thank you for the prayers. Those of you who are praying and thinking about your boy, man, appreciate it. I followed the syllabus. I'm not really tripping because about due dates, but try to stay on top of the dates, please, please, please. All right, y'all. Take care. Stay strong.